started again. So again, the Committee for the Republic of Canada, thank you all for coming. This second half, we are going to be hearing from Brian Gray. Brian Gray is a longtime organizer with this movement. He actually took a few years off. This has been a phenomenon actually in the movement over the last probably year and a half, is that a lot of the organizers that were with the movement in the 70s and 80s are coming back. They are seeing the necessity of and the significance of what this movement is doing internationally. And I'll just touch a little bit on what Harley was speaking about, is the connection between the BRICS process, and that process is a dynamic process, meaning it's not just jumping from one to the next. There's a process involved with that. And it's due to the organizing that our movement has been doing on an international level. As I'm getting to know the movement, I've been reading through some old Fidelios, which I had quoted from earlier, and those are available online. That is a very good magazine, but it also goes through a lot of the build-up to the happenings right now with the BRICS. There's a picture of LaRouche and Glaziev, who is one of Putin's top economic advisors, sitting together at a conference, I believe in Russia. And the really impactful thing is that what Harley was touching on and what I've talked about is these paradoxes, these ironies that, as even Paul was saying, you speak to people who think that they're well informed, and what they don't understand is that we are in wartime propaganda right now, and we have to question everything. It starts with ourselves. It starts with our own self-perceptions and how we both think of ourselves and our society, as well as questioning the politicians, questioning your community leaders, questioning the newspapers, writing letters to the editor, calling your MP, calling your MLA, making sure that they know that this is important to you. What a lot of people don't understand is that, and again, this is one of those major paradoxes, what is the impetus for this war buildup? It has been coming for a long time, and our movement has been behind creating the alternative to the system that the oligarchs would like to go ahead with. So it's not just about creating a change in ourselves. It's about recognizing that there is something else to go to. That is necessary. Now, a couple of items that are very important, we haven't focused on them in this conference. We will be talking about them at our next conference, which will be happening likely end of February, March. We will be letting you all know. Are our two economic policies. One is Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall is a policy that was put forward by FDR during the time of the Depression. This policy essentially bankrupts Wall Street. I won't get into all the details here, but this is what it does. It breaks the multinationals' control over our economy. Wall Street is run through the City of London. Now, if you want to draw the connections as well to what Harley was saying earlier, he didn't want to comment on Canada, but what effect do you think that will have on Canada and Canadians if Wall Street goes broke? Glass-Steagall essentially makes what is now considered legal stealing illegal. That is the power of what it does. It did this when it was first initiated, and I've heard some arguments from people, well, isn't that, just going back in time? Well, what is the impact that would have right now? It's real, it's tangible, it's actionable, and it protects your money. And what I mean by that is that part of the plan for the oligarchical system to come to fruition is what's called a bail-in. Glass-Steagall is the opposite of the bail-in. The bail-in is like a bail-out on steroids. Instead of getting tax dollars for their failure to have a balance in their reserves and keeping them afloat, what is in the Canadian Economic Development Action Plan under Harper is a bail-in policy. And that bail-in policy is based on the Cyprus model. And if anyone remembers what happened in Cyprus in 2012, is that they confiscated bank accounts. So banks had to come to the realization that they were insolvent, and they turned people's savings accounts, TSFAs, RSPs, pensions, into their assets. So it's very important that that is one thing that we can really point to our MPs, our MLAs, and this is part of the work that we do when we meet with them. The other, and that's really relevant to Canadians specifically, it's a universal policy though, and it can apply to any country. What it also does is it protects the currency of the country. And to put this in kind of another paradoxical scenario, you know, it has to come back to the sovereignty. Russia is protecting their sovereignty as a nation. And as Canadians, we have to do that as well. And that is not going to happen as long as we are under the Queen. And we are a colony of the British Empire. Don't fool yourselves. But as a friend of mine quoted recently, I thought it was really brilliant actually. It's, you know, looking at an institution like the United Nations, what we can turn that around into is nations united. And that's what we really have to be. We have to have nations united. And this is what the BRICS represent, as is not up here. Just 1 second. This is what the BRICS actually represents, our nations united around a cause, and that is fighting this war drive. And the opposite of war is development. Peace through progress. So as we go into the second half, I really want to, again, challenge you just to think about your concepts and ask yourself whether or not those are your concepts or if they're concepts that have been you know, pushed upon us by this the media system that we have. You know, really questioning, where does our cynicism come from? Where do we get that? Where have we forgotten about our own humanity and the great things that we can do as a creative species? So turning cynicism into positivism. Sorry, not positive, to having hope for the future. Turning competition into cooperation. That's what this represents. It's not, and that's what the Asian International Infrastructure Bank represents. It's what the BRICS are doing right now, and extending that to the United States and Canada is cooperation. And this is a foreign idea. We don't get this, it's not popularized, it's not talked about. People just don't get the concept of cooperation. It's, well, what's in it for me? Or what's in it for you? You know, there's so much cynicism. You know, really turning it around to peace and progress. What does that actually look like? And we have to be able to envision that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brian. Brian is, oh, sorry, actually, one more thing I just wanted to mention. This movement survives on donations from the public. We don't take donations from, we don't take money from corporations, from NGOs, from governments. We're strictly publicly funded, and that was my litmus test before joining this movement, was, you know, you can find their agenda generally by following the money, and that was very important for myself. So I encourage you all to purchase some Canadian Patriots, some EIRs that are out there. We also have subscriptions for the EIR, which you can get online. We also have the New Silk Road Report, which is part of our major initiative right now. Paul has a couple here. They are $250 each. We've done a really great job of trying to get this information out to the public, and hope that you can invest in us. And what you're investing in is the meetings that we're going to be having with MPs and MLAs, city councillors, mayors, to get these items on the agenda and to shift the dialogue. So, again, without any more comments, I'll leave it to Brian to introduce himself.
Thanks, Robbie, and thank you folks for your attendance here today. I'm compelled to just give you guys a brief kind of thumbnail sketch of my history and why I'm standing here in front of you today. In that, especially for some of you folks that are active with the CRC here in the Lower Mainland, in that I'm relatively new to the organization. I've only been active for about 10 months. However, I've known about the organization for about 35 years. In that, back in the day, actually from 1976 to 83, as Robbie had mentioned, I was an active organizer for the Rouge movement here in Canada, out of Vancouver, and the only other local we had was in Montreal, which is now morphed into the Committee for Republic of Canada. Back then, we actually had a political party accreditation. We were known as the North American Labour Party, which caused a lot of consternation and a lot of anxiety in the political arena. For example, I'll make this short, the left-wing swamp, as we affectionately call them, namely the Communist Party of Canada, Communist Party of Marxist-Leninists, the various Trotskyite and Maoist factions, they were totally exasperated by our organization because we weren't, our name was Labour. We had Labour in our party name, but we weren't stomping our feet and throwing our fists up in the air saying, make the capitalists pay, make the bosses pay, down with capitalism. We would totally exasperate them. The other faction of the left, namely the NDP, hated us because our policies indeed reflected the best interests of labor through our commitment to higher density flux energy applications, which raises the quality of the productive capacity of labor and therefore wages. And at every turn we would also point out the less than savory origins of the NDP, which came out of the whole British Fabian Society, eugenics kind of ugly stuff. So the left hated us, and on the right we had at that time the governing party was the Socreds, social credit. Now, in spite of a certain lineage or a tradition of nation building from W.A.C. Bennett and Dr. Pat McGeer, that party basically had morphed into nothing more than a collection of libertarians, really. And when we engaged them and put forward our policy, if you didn't couch your statements with the phrase free enterprise about 10 times when you're talking to them, their eyes would glass over and our policies would go right over their head. They weren't the sharpest tools in the shed. And nothing's changed much in this province at all. But anyways, that said, I eventually got discouraged and I was down in Detroit and I quit. Something I'm not proud of. But anyways, over the last number of years, I've been kind of a fish out of water and, putting in time and staying in touch with the organization through watching or through pulling up the web page and occasionally writing a letter to the editor to try to correct the idiocy that you find in the media and putting forward some LaRouche policy. But that and a buck and a half will get you a cup of coffee. So it was pretty frustrating. And then finally, and then this I'll get on to the presentation at hand. Finally, when the British, US, EU, NATO, Victoria Nuland-led $5 billion Nazi coup took place in Ukraine, that was it. And with, of course, our Prime Minister in full compliance and actually giving that Nazi regime $200 million of our money, that was it. I couldn't stand to be a citizen of a country whose president or Prime Minister supports Nazis. And in particular, that whole strategy was pushing the world closer to the brink of nuclear war. So I quickly got on the email and contacted the folks back in Montreal, and Matthew Eric got back to me And I said, hey, look at, we got to do something. How about, here's an idea, let's launch a preemptive strike. And I'll announce a candidacy in the next federal election, and we'll cut into this thing, start getting some truth and reason out, and get the proper policy debated. So in that interim, we've been crafting together a campaign platform, and then the BRICS came on the scene. Now, I'm sure, I don't know if everybody knows those guys' names. Obviously, Vladimir Putin is well known, and Xi Jinping. But that's Narendra Modi, he's the Prime Minister of India, and Dilma Rousseff, she's the President of Brazil, and that's Jacob Zuma, he's the President of South Africa. Well, fortunately, those guys came on the scene and put forward the International Development Bank, or the New Development Bank, which is a seed crystal that was planted by Lyndon LaRouche back in the mid-70s, the new International Development Bank. Anyways, these guys come on the scene, and we get a little bit of breathing room. So let's keep rolling with this thing. And the question at hand for me to try to explain to you is, what is Canada's role in this emergence of the new BRIC dynamic? In the fact that Canada is de facto a British colony, our role is pretty minimal. The change in our country is not going to come by some kind of epiphany coming out of Harper's mind and moving towards this much needed political dynamic. It's going to come from us. We're the only organization that is campaigning and politicizing this whole situation. People in our society don't even know much about the BRICS. So you might have heard some little snippet on the CBC, but the news is not forthcoming. So what we want to do is we want to get this country to participate in the kind of brotherly, the actual ideas that have come out of the BRICS movement, and especially out of the formulation of and the finalization out of the APEC meetings, where they're putting forward policies that are completely antithetical to the British geopolitical structure. The political structure of divide and conquer, constant conflict, beggar thy neighbor. They're putting an end to that. Prosper thy neighbor and cooperate. And I would just like to read this one quote from Xi Jinping. I think he made this a couple weeks ago to some colleagues in China, and he says this is the kind of people we're dealing with, statecraft that's coming from these guys. Xi Jinping said, "We are firm in our position that all countries, regardless of their size, strength, and level of development, are equal members of the international community, and that the destiny of the world should be decided by people of all countries. We should uphold international justice, and in particular, speak up for the developing countries. We should seek other countries' understanding of and support for the Chinese dream, which is about peace, development, cooperation, and win-win situations. While what we pursue is the well-being of both the Chinese people and the people of all other countries." Now, you compare that kind of statescraft to what we see coming from Obama, from Harper, from Baird, from Cameron in the UK, from Merkel in Germany, from Netanyahu. There is virtually no comparison. These people are talking about development, peace through development. And our leaders in this bankrupt Western world are stomping their feet, sticking sharp objects into Russia's eye, and they should be put in some kind of safe environment where we can live a little bit easier, and they won't bring damage to our world. And it's got to be a pretty big room, because there's a lot more candidates that can go in there too. I mean, Susan Rice and what's her name, Samantha Power and Victoria Nuland and John McCain, and for good measure, I think we should chuck in Don Cherry, just for something. Any case, what I'd like to now get to the point. Sorry for that kind of arduous, long introduction, but what is Canada's role in this new emerging dynamic that the BRICS are affording us? And in particular, the New Development Bank and the Asia Infrastructure Bank that has come forward out of the APEC meeting. There's more banks on the way. And the rapid policy development and changes that are coming from these organizations is mind-boggling. It makes your head spin. On the way down here for this conference, within the 2 days of leaving Penticton to come down here and relax and get this conference organized, I've had to make little crib notes all over these rough points I've made here, because every day there's new developments from these countries in the area of nuclear energy and infrastructure, and space exploration. So what I'd like to do now is talk about three main areas where our country can certainly cooperate and indeed has a place where we can play with the BRICS nation. And those three areas are in Canada's revitalization of and restoration of our nuclear industry. And it can be done sustainably and ecologically sustainable without any interference of massive environmental regulation. So let me just go back. Okay, so what we want to do is ensure that Canada's role in not only developing our North up to that point, we maintain a role that is more of an arbiter, more of a facilitator, and more of a voice of reason, echoing what the BRICS have put forward and what Xi Jinping has put forward in the result of the APEC meeting just completed a little while ago. In other words, we want to see this country allow some credence, if you will, in the phrase of our in the phrase of our anthem, "The true north, strong and free." Well, we want to have the real right to say that. So that's northern development. That is the Northwest Passage. Canada is claiming that passage is all ours. And the international community is saying that no, it's an international seaway. So we've got to reconcile that. I think Hartford would probably like to put a toll bridge on each end and charge everybody money, and he'd probably charge Putin twice. So anyways, let's just move on here. Oh yeah, okay, and then finally closing, in doing some research on this topic, I discovered that there's an inlet up there called Gray's Inlet. So I say, that's cool, I got an inlet named after me. And it's up there, sort of. It's hard to point here, but it's up there. And it turns out, as it is, there's a Canadian company, it's actually a Canadian subsidiary of a Chinese-owned company, that China and Canada are jointly participating in a mining operation there. There's been no shovels in the ground at all yet, but that's their approach, Canada and China's approach in Gray's Inlet. Now we want to make sure that kind of development is the right kind of sustainable development that is required. In other words, we don't want to see any kind of greed-driven shortcuts that we saw British Petroleum pull in the Gulf of Mexico off of the Louisiana coast, where it's been proven they were caught red-handed using faulty technology and continued to drill, and we had an ecological disaster. Well, there's got to be protocols put in place where everybody uses the state-of-the-art high-technology development for our north. So that's the role that we want to see Canada take, develop our north, and that's going to require small nukes up there as well. We need small can-dos in certain spots, and that'll come into another part of this discussion that I'm going to bring up right now, which is our nuclear industry. And that's another thing that Canada can be proud of. By that, I mean, not too many people know it, but Canada was the second country in the world to utilize nuclear energy production for electrification, the first country being the United States. But Canada is also the first country to export nuclear technology. We sold a CANDU reactor to India in 1972, and subsequent to that to Romania, to Argentina, to Pakistan, to China, South Korea. And the CANDU reactor has a worldwide recognition of a strong, reliable, durable reactor. It's like sort of the old vet of the nuclear industry. And its technology is the third widest used technology in the world. They're not all Canadian CANDUs, but other countries have seen the merit of our technology and have copied it. So, like I say, Canadians can be proud of our nuclear industry. And what we want to see, as I mentioned about northern development, we are definitely going to have to see more nuclear energy production in our country. But we want to see Canada participate more in further exporting our technology, because the point is, what the BRICS have done is a commitment to infrastructure development. And what is a linchpin in all that, what is key in all that, is a commitment to nuclear energy development. And sane nations are moving in that direction rapidly. And what I'd just like to say is that 3/4 of the nuclear power plants in our world now are being built in BRICS countries. In other words, the 48% of the population of our world is building 75% of our nuclear energy development plants. So, you know, Canada, our nuclear industry is basically, it's functioning, but it's pretty much dormant. As is evidence of Chalk River, which is our nuclear research development, our nuclear research facility. It was built in 1947, and right now the Canadian government still owns it, but it's contracted out the operation of Chalk River to SNC Lavalin, a Canadian company, and they're just basically acting as caretakers. They're not committed to any new research and development. Chalk River is one of the main suppliers of isotopes for medical research around the world. So, as opposed to that, for example, the Soviets, the Russians, have just launched a program called Nuke Lab, which is coming online next year, and it's a kind of a coordination of their research and development program to kind of centralize in the city just outside of Moscow. Right now, Russia has 350 research and development programs throughout their country, employing a little over 250 million people. And this new Nuke Lab program that they're putting forward is going to coordinate space and nuclear energy technology and research right there. And Canada is functioning with Chalk River, which was built in 1947. So what we're saying is, come on Canada, let's get with the program here. Morris Strong had a lot to do with kind of the taking down of our industry in this country. And I'm not going to go into all that, but I will hold up this Patriot. This is our core publication again, and there's a real good rundown in here of how the certain environments or certain environmentalist movements that Morris Strong is a big part of have put in the whole big bugaboo scare about nuclear energy. It's put in very good perspective in that magazine. I encourage you to check it out outside there. I'd like to also mention that there's unbelievable pace of development that's going on in this field, as I mentioned on the way on coming down. I had to make all these notes, but for example, Narendra Modi, who's the PM of India, he at a recent conference called for a development of a BRICS university, which is to bring in students from all the other countries and commit themselves to the study of these kind of technologies, nuclear technology in particular. And he's calling for, as I think Harley had mentioned, he's calling for a program that will create 1 million jobs per month, per year for 10 years. It's 120 million jobs. Now, Evo Morales, who's the president of Bolivia, he's basically told the IMF and the World Bank and the London and the New York banking access crowd, the empire, to take a hike. And he's saying that Bolivia is going Promethean. Our future fire is nuclear power. There's been breakneck speed type of negotiations going on and agreements being passed for the transfer of nuclear technology. Russia is going to be constructing Turkey's first nuclear power plant, and Russia is also, along with China, is going to be developing 8 plants in Iran. Australia, which I believe actually has stuff written down in its so-called constitution that prohibits nuclear power, they're actually starting to say we need nuclear energy. So and South Africa is the only country in Africa, the whole continent of Africa, that has a nuclear power plant. And China and Russia are working with South Africa right now to build 6 plants down there. China, I believe, has something in the neighborhood of 262 operating plants right now. 22 plants are under construction right now. And by the year 1030, 15 years from now, China wants to have that's the target, wants to have 1,000 nuclear plants in production. So we're saying, okay, we got the technology, we have the engineers that can design this kind of stuff, we have certainly the transportation capability to get stuff over there and help build CANDU reactors. Let's get on with the program. Nuclear power is the linchpin in the BRICS program, and we're saying that Canada has to become a part of that. Canada has to start exporting more of our nuclear industry, our nuclear technology, and we have to start developing more nuclear reactors for use in our own country. So that's one aspect of how we can interface with this BRICS dynamic, nuclear energy. We've already discussed the North Outlook. I'll close with one last one, and that's space. Again, yesterday, this is Saturday, yesterday, Friday, the Americans did something that I wasn't even aware of. As I said, things happen so quickly now. But the United States has recommitted themselves to a certain degree on manned spaceflight. They just brought an Orion spacecraft back to Earth after a 4-hour orbit of the Earth twice. It's a manned, it's a module designed for manned spaceflight. It's targeting Mars exploration. But whether they'll get that far with Obama's kind of policies, that's doubtful. But at least they did that. But there's been this unbelievable pace of developments that the BRICS nations and Japan and Pakistan even have undertaken around this whole space program. And that all starts with, I wonder where that helium-3 went. I know where it is, way up front, because I went out of order. Yeah, it's all driven by that. The Chinese have developed have embarked on a very aggressive space and lunar program. And part of that program is to mine helium-3 off the moon's surface. Helium-3 is a non-radioactive isotope that's found in abundance on the moon, but very rarely on our Earth. That's just because of the interaction of the sun and the moon and the Earth. It accumulates on the moon, not here. So what we're saying is that with Canada's participation in the space industry, with the Canada arm, we can indeed function in this spacefaring world that the BRICS nations are embarking on. And again, just as Canadians can be proud about their nuclear industry, we can be proud about what we've done in the space industry as well, in that this particular robot, well, it found its debut on the space shuttle system in 1981, but it actually was started in 1969 when a company named DSMA Acton, it's a robotics company, designed an arm to use for removing and replacing fuel in CANDU reactors. Now NASA caught wind of that, and they said, we need some robotics for our space program. So in 1975, a Canadian company called Spar Aerospace developed the Canada arm, and it made its first flight on a space shuttle in 1981. And after 90 missions, the space shuttle was finally, well, after 90 missions with the arm on there, the space shuttle was eventually retired and the Canada arm was retired. But the legacy of that particular technology still continues because various robotics that have spun off that have been used in the International Space Station. So and there's been unbelievable progress by other nations in space exploration. And I mean, the Rosetta project that the Europeans launched was incredible. I mean, if you think about it, what they did, well, the analogy is something like, you know, taking a slingshot, putting maybe a marble in there, and trying to hit a speck of sand that's, 200 million miles away. And they did that. So, I think human creativity, if we can get the dictator off, the oligarchs and the empire off our back, indeed, our globe, our solar system, and our universe is rightfully ours, not in the egotistical sense, but the extraterrestrial imperative is ours. We've just got to start doing it right. And we can do that right if we rid ourselves of empire, if we rid ourselves of this philosophy, this geopolitics that denies humankind his rightful place on our earth. And so I would just close by asking you to, I'll find the right, I kind of got nervous and I went out of order. Sorry about that, but here's the world, here's the kind of world we're facing right now. This is the NATO encirclement of Russia, And all down the bottom of the Pacific side, that's Obama's Asia pivot strategy, the land air sea strategy. And that map actually has to be revised because there's been more and more deployments, in particular NATO deployments into Poland and Lithuania. But, and just quickly, that so-called missile defense system is nothing but a defense system against Russia. The Americans are, Bush put it forward, Obama has expanded it. They're saying, oh no, it's supposed to be against South Korea and Iran. Well, that's baloney. It's designed to counter anything the Russians might be able to put back after the United States and NATO launch attacks into Russia. So anyways, that's the world, the frightening world we're looking at, and this is the world we want. The land bridge. That is a picture of the land bridge up there being Alaska in the Bering Strait Tunnel. There's a picture of the land bridge from the north. There's our land bridge, British Columbia. We want that kind of world, not a world that's being threatened by war. And that slide shows you an artist's concept of what the high-speed rail maglev train will look like going through Bering Strait Tunnel. So I would just ask you, if you are a thinking human being, if you're a patriotic Canadian, then I could ask you to join us, but it's actually imperative that you do join us because we have two options: peace through progress, or a thermonuclear holocaust if we don't rid ourselves of empire. Okay, thanks.
That will have on Canada and Canadians if Wall Street goes broke. Glass-Steagall essentially makes what is now considered legal stealing illegal. That is the power of what it does. It did this when it was first initiated, and I've heard some arguments from people, well, isn't that, just going back in time? Well, what is the impact that would have right now? It's real, it's tangible, it's actionable, and it protects your money. And what I mean by that is that part of the plan for the oligarchical system to come to fruition is what's called a bail-in. Glass-Steagall is the opposite of the bail-in. The bail-in is like a bail-out on steroids. Instead of getting tax change in ourselves, it's about recognizing that there is something else to go to. That is necessary. Now, a couple of items that are very important, we haven't focused on them in this conference. We will be talking about them at our next conference, which will be happening likely end of February, March. We will be letting you all know. Are our two economic policies. One is Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall is a policy that was put forward by FDR during the time of the Depression. This policy essentially bankrupts Wall Street. I won't get into all the details here, but this is what it does. It breaks the multinationals' control over our economy. Wall Street is run through the City of London. Now, if you want to draw the connections as well to what Harley was saying earlier, he didn't want to comment on Canada, but what effect do you think, it's not just jumping from one to the next, there's a process involved with that. And it's due to the organizing that our movement has been doing on an international level. As I'm getting to know the movement, I've been reading through some old Fidelios, which I had quoted from earlier, and those are available online. That is a very good magazine, but it also goes through a lot of the build-up to the happenings right now with the BRICS. There's a picture of LaRouche and Glaziev, who is one of Putin's top economic advisors, sitting together at a conference, I believe in Russia. And the really impactful thing is that what Harley was touching on and what I've talked about is these paradoxes, these ironies that, you know, as even Paul was saying, you know, you speak to people who think Thank you, everyone. We're going to get started again. So again, the Committee for the Republic of Canada, thank you all for coming. This second half, we are going to be hearing from Brian Gray. Brian Gray is a longtime organizer with this movement. He actually took a few years off. This has been a phenomenon actually in the movement over the last probably year and a half, is that a lot of the organizers that were with the movement in the 70s and 80s are coming back. They are seeing the necessity of and the significance of what this movement is doing internationally. And I'll just touch a little bit on what Harley was speaking about, is the connection between the BRICS process, and that process is a dynamic process, meaning they're well informed. And what they don't understand is that we are in wartime propaganda right now, and we have to question everything. It starts with ourselves. It starts with our own self-perceptions and how we both think of ourselves and our society, as well as questioning the politicians, questioning your community leaders, questioning the newspapers, writing letters to the editor, calling your MP, calling your MLA, making sure that they know that this is important to you. What a lot of people don't understand is that, and again, this is one of those major paradoxes, what is the impetus for this war buildup? It has been coming for a long time, and our movement has been behind creating the alternative to the system that the oligarchs would like to go ahead with. So it's not just about creating